Hey Optimancers, Chris here. So, yeah, what the title of the video says. I got a chance to playtest with the new Player's Handbook Playtest 8 rules last night at level 14. We restricted ourselves to the classes in the playtest, so we ended up with a Berserker Barbarian, a Path of the World Tree Barbarian, 2 Way of the Open Hand Monks, a Moon Druid, and I played a Circle of the Sea Druid. And Circle of the Sea is a blast. That's not what this video is about. I did a video where I think I was crystal clear that the redesigns of the Conjure spells from the Player's Handbook is something I'm personally delighted by. But now I want to actually analyze those spells, and I'll share my opinions on them and share what I'm actually going to say in the survey, which opens on Monday, December 11th, which is the day I'm going to try to plan for this video to drop. So there's 3 brand new spells in the playtest, and let's start with those. So we have Fount of Moonlight, a 4th level spell available to bards and druids, and this one is very comparable to the new conjuration spells in that it's an action to cast, it's a 10-minute duration, and it uses concentration. And it says you emit some light, yada yada, but the meaningful stuff is you gain resistance to radiant damage, your melee attacks do an additional 2d6 radiant damage, and you get a reaction where if you take damage from a creature within 60 feet of you, they make a Constitution saving throw or have the blinded condition until the end of your next turn. So, I mean, obviously this spell was created with the Moon Druid in mind, so they would have a spell they could cast in Wild Shape with a moon theme. Any druid or bard can take this spell, but I think the reason it's here is all about the Moon Druid. And I appreciate that intention, but here's the thing. I have some criticisms of the Moon Druid that I'll get in more detail with in a future video, but in regards to this spell particularly, 2d6 damage on every hit really isn't ideal for Moon Druids. So here's the challenge rating 2 and higher beast that you might wild shape into with a higher level Moon Druid. And these are all the ones from the Monster Manual. And what you're going to notice here is that by and large, except for Giant Scorpion, which has a terrible to hit, by and large, these all have like one big attack that does a lot of damage. Well, that's not so great if I'm combining it with a spell that does additional damage every time I attack. It's a terrible combination. I think this would work much better for the presumably intended subclass if the damage bonus was bigger, but it was a once on your turn thing. That would allow the Moon Druid in that tougher form to use this spell properly. There's an issue with the blinded saving throw as well and Wild Shape. That's for another video, and that's an issue with the Moon Druid more than this spell. Our Moon Druid cast this spell, and they commented that they were basically forced to just stick with the bear form, even at higher levels, because they needed the multi-attack of the bear to make this work. And that is simply not ideal. We want the Moon Druid to have a good selection of forms, and this is kind of pushing them into very specific forms, and that's not a great thing. So I will be marking satisfied for this spell because I do think the spell is okay, it just really needs some tweaking. And these will be my comments. I like the idea of a moon-themed spell that Moon Druids can cast well in Wild Shape, though I don't think some aspects of this spell translate to Wild Shape all that well. The extra 2d6 on every attack, for example. Higher level Moon Druids are likely choosing higher challenge rating beast forms, and most of those don't get multiple attacks, so wouldn't it make more sense for this to do more damage, but limit it to once on the caster's turn, or something? Okay, next new spell. Starry Wisp is the new cantrip, and I only cast this once in our playtest, but it's a pretty standard attack cantrip, so I'm not sure I really need to playtest it. It has a 60-foot range, which is on the low side for ranged cantrips, does a d8 damage with a standard cantrip scaling, and when you hit a target, it emits 10 feet of dim light, and they can't benefit from the invisible condition. So, as a damage cantrip, this is fine, but not exceptional. A d8 is pretty average, and the 60-foot range is on the low side, but it's not terrible. The rider here, though, is definitely really circumstantial, but when it comes up, it's going to be really nice. Now, if the creature you hit is already invisible when you cast this spell, you will have disadvantage on your attack roll, of course. So you might want to try to set up advantage to counter that and make it a straight up roll, and there are lots of ways to do that with the playtest material. Now, Jeremy Crawford mentioned something in the Playtest 8 video that bards and druids didn't have many options for range attack cantrips, and he's right. I mean, I think with the recent cantrip playtest, the druid really got their only legit ranged attack cantrip by increasing the range of Produce Flame to 60 feet. So now the druid has two fairly decent ranged options that are comparable. For the bard, they don't really have any ranged attack cantrips. I mean, Vicious Mockery has range, but it's not an attack. So this will be a nice option for bards, and if I was playing bard, I would definitely consider it. So I won't have a lot to say with this one. I'm satisfied, and I'll probably say, this looks decent. I would definitely consider this spell on a bard or a druid. I like the bit about the target not benefiting from the invisible condition. Okay, power word Fortify. So I have not had a chance to see this one in play at all yet, unfortunately, but I will give you my impressions because I didn't talk about this one in my previous videos. So this is a 7th level spell for bards and clerics. You cast it as an action, and you get a pool of 120 temporary hit points to spread amongst up to 6 creatures within range, but you split up the temporary hit points equally. So, you know what I'm going to say, right? I mean, I think this is pretty obvious. If I spread this out 6 ways, that's 20 temporary hit points per target, and I'm at least level 13 if I'm casting this spell, and 20 temporary hit points just isn't really that special at level 13. I mean, definitely not 7th level spell special. World Tree Barbarians are handing out temporary hit points every round for free now. Not quite 20, it's still 3d6 at 13th level, and they're not really expending any resources to do it. It's just something they're going to be doing as part of their rage. There might be times where spreading this out is the clutch move, but I think most of the time, I don't think that would be worth a 7th level spell. But 120 temporary hit points to one target, now that's cool. These kinds of numbers will make a big difference, even at high levels. If I cast Heal at 7th level, I'm healing 80 hit points. Or cast this, give them 120 temporary hit points. Unless your target is unconscious, the 120 temporary hit points is probably better. So I really like this, but honestly, I think one target is the way to go. Far more potent than spreading it out. So I think I'll mark very satisfied for this one. I'm all for power word spells that are actually good, and there's really not any other spell that does anything like this, or at least to this degree. So I'll have fairly simple comments here. I'll just say I like this spell a lot. I haven't had a chance to try it out yet, but I am looking forward to it. So I'm not going to go over the healing spell redesign because I think I already covered it in pretty good detail in my past video. But the conjure spells, I did a video for them, and in that video I was more commenting how important it was to address outlier spells, which these new conjure spells do. I mean, it's not just about what these spells add to the game, but the problems they are removing from the game by removing clunky, poorly balanced mechanics. That is why I am so thrilled for these spells. But now I actually want to just analyze these spells without thinking about what they mean for the game as a whole. So I'm going to start with Conjure Celestial, and I have not seen this one in play yet. It's a 7th level cleric spell, and it's kind of like a supercharged moonbeam spell. You have this 10-foot radius pillar of light, and you get to move it up to 30 feet on your turn without using an action or anything. When a creature enters the pillar or starts its turn there, you can do damage to it or you can heal it. But you can only do the healing thing once per creature each time you cast a spell. And there are a couple details here I just wanted to highlight. The spell truly has no friendly fire. I mean, even if a creature has already been healed, you don't need to inflict the damage next time. It says here you can bathe that creature in one of the following lights, meaning you can also choose not to do that. The other thing I want to mention is that the damage here seems a little bit high. 8d12, it's a lot of damage when it's potentially being inflicted multiple times per round to the same creature, because force movement was already cheap before Playtest 8, now it's cheaper than ever, so your monks, your barbarians, and everyone else can push and pull creatures into this over and over, and 8d12 every single turn, that seems high. Like, I would probably suggest maybe 6d12. But I wasn't kidding when I said I would score all these conjure spells very satisfied. I'm going to do that. The designers read every single comment. They have people dedicated to going through every single comment and reading them. So I can leave criticisms there while being very satisfied with the spell. So, for example, with this spell, here's what I plan to say. To start with, my very satisfied score is based on replacing the clunky 2014 Conjure spells. The game will be better without them. Overall, I like Conjure Celestial. The ability to do either damage or heal is very nice. And I kind of like the Pillar of Light idea, so when I'm conjuring a Celestial, it's like the Celestial is showering down this Pillar of Light from the heavens to aid me. That's a pretty good way to keep the spell appropriate for its name. My criticism would be the damage seems a bit high here. I would think 6d12 would be perfectly fine. Okay, so now let's look at when I did playtest, and it's not working so hot right now. So Conjure Elemental is actually a pretty bad spell. So you create this 10-foot cube of elemental spiritness that does varying damage types depending on what type of element you choose. And when I say delivers damage, don't count on that. So it says when a creature hostile to you moves within 5 feet of the spirit, you make a melee spell attack against them, you do 8d8 damage on a hit, and if they're large or smaller, they get sucked into the cube and are restrained. And that all sounds cool enough. The problem is the wording, which I'm guessing is intentional, but I'm not sure why they think this is a good idea. So it says when a creature hostile to you moves within 5 feet, so right there, that's the important bit. Notice the different wording here. So if we go back to Conjure Celestial, it says when a creature enters the cylinder for the first time. So what's the difference? Notice that the word moves is underlined. That's the difference. So if we go to the beginning of the document, it tells us what that means. An underlined term in the body text appears in the glossary. So I think they've used the term moves and underlined it to let us know we're not just talking about a creature entering the space within 5 feet of the elemental spirit, but it needs to move. So let's look up move in the glossary. So here it is, and guess what? It refers to the movement you make using your speed. Using your speed. In other words, knocking or shoving a creature within 5 feet of the spirit does nothing. They have to move into 5 feet using their own speed. They don't mean moves as per natural language. They underlined it because it is in the glossary and there's specific rules involved. Now, I guess if you're putting this in a hallway where enemies need to move through, or some kind of choke point maybe, it could be useful. But this kind of restriction just isn't on any of these other spells. And we already can't move the Conjured Elemental, so this is just way, way too restrictive. Now, I am still going to mark this very satisfied, but these will be my comments. To start with, my very satisfied score is based on replacing the clunky 2014 Conjure spells. The game will be better without them. That said, I can't say I'm a fan of this version of Conjure Elemental. Requiring the hostile creature to use its own speed to move within 5 feet of the 10-foot cube is just way too restrictive, especially when all these other spells are only requiring a creature enter the area. I really think for this spell to be a decent spell, that limitation needs to be removed. Okay, Conjure Fey. Now, I didn't actually see this one in play either. I used my 6th level spell slot on a Hero's Feast spell, but I am going to be marking it very satisfied. But these will be my comments. To start with, my very satisfied score is based on replacing the clunky 2014 Conjure spells, yada yada. That said, the damages of this spell seem out of whack. It's 3d12 plus your spellcasting modifier. That seems quite low for a 6th level concentration spell, especially when the other Conjure spells in this playtest upcast to 6th level are doing quite a bit more. But the upcasting option here seems out of whack in the other direction. 3d12 for 6th level, and then 2d12 for each additional spell level. So you never want to cast this at 6th level then, but if it's upcast, it's okay. Seems to me the base damage should be higher, but the upcasting should be d12. Okay, so Conjure Woodland Beings. Now I use this in the playtest, and yeah, it feels a whole lot like Spirit Guardians, which is fine. Damage ends up being about the same. It's force damage instead of radiant, and that usually doesn't matter. The radius is a bit smaller, but that didn't seem to make too much of a difference in our playtest either. The bad guys just get pushed within 10 feet of me instead of 15 feet. I mean, whatever. There's no slowed movement. Instead, you get a bonus action disengage, which is fine. So, I will be marking very satisfied, but here's my comments. To start with, my very satisfied score is based on blah blah blah. Conjure Woodland Beings worked fine in the game I tried it out in. Very similar and comparable to Spirit Guardians. My question is, why is this a 5th level spell? Conjure Woodland Beings in the 2014 Player's Handbook is a 4th level spell. Wouldn't it make more sense to make this a 4th level spell with 4d8 base damage? And, I mean, then it would upcast the same as what it is here. There really doesn't seem to me to be any reason not to do that. Okay, Conjure Minor Elementals. Now this one is getting some online buzz. So this is a really, really beefed up Spirit Shroud. Basically, it's twice the damage on every attack, and instead of slowing, you have difficult terrain around you, which is kind of the same thing. In fact, if you upcast to 6th level or higher, this does more than double the damage of Spirit Shroud, cast to the same level. And upcast enough, and combined with extra attack and nick attack, this, I think, is going to get out of control. The only other difference you're really going to notice is that Spirit Shroud is a bonus action to cast and only lasts 1 minute, while this is an action to cast but lasts up to 10 minutes. So I guess the one time Spirit Shroud might actually be better is if you're casting the spell on round 1. But if you have this up already, Spirit Shroud is obsolete. Now, I never thought Spirit Shroud was a great spell to begin with, but there are some specialized builds where it makes sense, but overall, unless you build around it, it's not really worth taking. Now here, I think they've overcorrected, because those specialized builds that use Spirit Shroud, well, put this on them and they're going to get out of control. Now, I'm still going to vote very satisfied, but I'm going to say, to start with, blah, blah, blah. With this spell, I think this just sends Spirit Shroud into obsolescence. I also think the damage here rewards extra attacks way too much. Valor Bards upcasting this spell will be delivering unbalanced levels of damage. I really think this spell shouldn't add to the damage of every attack, but it should be a once on your turn damage increase with a higher base amount. So this would also make the spell a lot more tempting for other bards or druids. Okay, and I am going to finish up with Conjure Animals, and I use this multiple times in the playtest, and these are my impressions. This spell is fun. I've heard a lot about how this is just another version of Spirit Guardians, but unlike Conjure Woodland Beings, this one didn't feel like Spirit Guardians at all, to me. I had this swarm of spirit animals. I said they were crabs because I was playing a Circle of the Sea Druid that could move around and make spell attacks. It was a blast. My favorite moments was when the DM would accidentally move an enemy within 10 feet of my swarm and they got snapped. Damage seems solid. There was one limitation I did notice. So when I read this spell, I saw you could move them 30 feet, and I figured, that's okay. Characters usually move 30 feet, so this matches. But characters don't actually move 30 feet. I always had Longstrider, so did the other druid. Barbarians have built-in speed increases, and the monks were speeding around whenever they want. Then you can have things like the World Tree Barbarian that can teleport the whole party, but they can't teleport your Spirit Swarm. So that 30-foot movement is a limitation, and I did feel it in one of the fights. But it's not an inappropriate limitation, considering the value of this spell. And it does feel a lot better than the 20 feet of something like Spiritual Weapon. Anyway, I love this spell, so my comments will be, no preamble this time. I am very satisfied with this spell. I had a chance to try it out a couple of times now, and it's a lot of fun. And I think it's reasonably balanced against other similar options, but operates differently enough to feel like a unique experience. I think you hit the mark here. Now, before I wrap this video up, I did want to give my take on something I'm seeing a lot online. So, what I've been reading from several players giving their impressions is that a spell named Conjure Animals should conjure animals, and they would be fine with this version if it was called Conjure Animal Spirits. And then Conjure Elemental would be Conjure Elemental Spirit, etc. And I get what you're saying if you're one of those people saying that. I just don't think the designers are going to change the names that way, and there's a couple of reasons I don't think it would be a good idea if they did. So, first off, they've promised over and over that this is 5th edition and all our old books are just fine. They're 100% compatible. This is going to be a seamless transition. I mean, they pretty much say that every video they do now. So, there's already some published adventure somewhere where a caster has Conjure Animals, not Conjure Animal Spirits. I mean, someone with a brain could probably figure out what they're supposed to do. But not seamlessly. If they want to keep their word, and it looks like they desperately do, they can't really change the spell names. Now, that part doesn't concern me, but I see why it concerns the design team. Here's what concerns me. So, Adventures League and various tables are going to be updating what rules they use when the new core books come out. And I would imagine a common guideline will be that if it's covered by the new rules, then you use the new rules. So, if you have the guidance cantrip, you use the version in the 2024 Player's Handbook and not the one in the 2014 Player's Handbook. Well, and I know, there is going to be some pissant who shows up at a table, Conjure Animals was not replaced. That's Conjure Animal Spirits. Different name. I summon 8 wolves. Screw that guy, by the way, but no reason to give him ammunition. And so that's my more in-depth take on these new spells, and I hope you found it interesting. And please share your opinions of the new Playtest 8 spells in the comments. Otherwise, until next time, I'm going to sit back, relax, and have some fun. D&D is for everyone. Thanks, everybody, and I'll talk to you soon. My ability to make these videos is thanks to the patrons of this channel. If you would be willing to support this content, please consider clicking the link in the video description to check out my Patreon. Today, I would like to thank Awesome Face, Benjamin, Brett McDowell, Christophe, Condor, Dash Panther, Dave Peters, David Lotz, David W. Skiddens, Ido, Isaac Leister, James Thomas, Jeremy Brown, Jonathan Lexi, K.J. Aurelio, Kavathe, Leonardo Gonzalez, Marlon Rooks, Meegish, Mr. Muffins, Rye Squy, Stephen Edmondson, TUM, The Algor Rhythm, and Valentin. And thanks to all my patrons.